So there I was on Christmas Day, pregnancy test in hand, totally freaking out with excitement as I raced to tell my boyfriend Stephen Jones the big news. But then I overheard him talking with his buddies, and my world crashed down. "Dude, you're not seriously gonna marry Cherry, are you?" one of them asked. "The Cooper girl has her eye on you. Marry Giselle, and you're set for life, man." "For real, Stephen, this is your golden ticket." I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for Stephen to say something. After what felt like forever, he finally spoke up. "I'm gonna break things off with Cherry." And just like that, my heart shattered into a million pieces. Chapter 1. I honestly don't even remember how I got back to my apartment. Just sat there alone while Stephen's words kept playing on repeat in my head like a bad song I couldn't turn off. Stephen and I were college classmates. I fell hard for him my freshman year. When I found out his family was broke, I pretended to be poor too, just so he wouldn't feel weird about us being together. Those college years were tough, but damn, we were happy. I really thought he was my forever person, you know? Even after graduation, when my dad kept pushing me to come back and work for the family business, I straight up refused. All I wanted was to stay with Stephen and build our life together. But in the end, he totally stabbed me in the back. That's when it hit me how stupid I'd been this whole time. I crashed on the couch, and when I woke up, Stephen was home. He reeked of booze and had this faint girly perfume on him. Didn't take a genius to figure out he'd been with Giselle. He looked at me with these conflicted eyes but just mumbled, "I'm beat," before heading straight to bed. I just sat there in the living room, watching him walk away. Then I made an appointment to get an abortion the next day and called my dad. "Dad, I'm coming home," I said. My dad was over the moon. He'd been waiting to hear those words forever. "You bringing that boyfriend of yours this time?" he asked, laughing. When I heard that, I just lost it and started crying my eyes out. I'd given up everything for Stephen, and all I got in return was a big fat betrayal. My dad freaked out when he heard me sobbing, kept asking what happened and saying he'd come right over. But I told him no. I promised I'd handle my stuff before coming home. After hanging up, I packed my things and left Stephen a note. The next day, I went through with the abortion. The nurses kept giving me these pitying looks that cut deep, but I forced myself to keep it together. While I was lying there in the hospital bed afterward, my phone rang. It was Stephen. "Cherry, where the hell did you go?" He sounded pissed. "What's with this note? Are you breaking up with me?" I let out this sad little laugh. "Stephen, isn't that what you wanted? You picked Giselle a long time ago, didn't you?" That shut him up real quick. After a few seconds, he lowered his voice and asked, "How do you know about Giselle?" When I didn't answer, Stephen got all panicky. "Cherry, it's not what you think." I just laughed bitterly and hung up. I was so done with Stephen's drama. I called my dad again to let him know I was coming home. This time he came to get me himself. When he saw me, the look in his eyes was just pure pain and worry. Chapter 2. I could see how much my dad was hurting for me as he brought me back home and told me to get some rest. He really took care of me during that time, and slowly but surely, I started to put Stephen behind me. But then one day, I'm just scrolling through my socials when I freeze. There it was, a pic of Stephen and Giselle at their freaking engagement party. In the photo, Giselle had this huge baby bump and was clinging to Stephen's arm with this smug smile plastered across her face. I stared at her pregnant belly and let out this bitter laugh. So that was it. Stephen and Giselle had been a thing the whole time. She was already knocked up with his kid. To keep my mind off things, my dad suggested I start working at the company. Since I was new, they didn't give me much to do. One day, my secretary told me about some business gala I needed to show up at. I said sure without thinking twice, never in a million years imagining I'd run into Stephen there. He showed up with Giselle hanging on his arm. When he spotted me, his face did this weird, complicated thing, while Giselle just looked at me like I was trash. "You must be Cherry Adams," she said, all high and mighty. I nodded. "Yep, that's me." "Didn't expect your company to send someone like you for this partnership," Giselle smirked. "You know, I'm super tight with your company's CEO. Actually, the eldest daughter of your family is like one of my BFFs. I blinked at her, then smiled politely. Her claim was straight up laughable. This was literally the first time I'd met her, so how could we possibly be best friends? Plus, our family was way above hers in the food chain. The Cooper family had been begging for this deal, and honestly, I wasn't even sure if we'd give it to them. As the richest family in the whole province, we held all the cards. Giselle was clearly just trying to make me feel small, but I wasn't about to play that game. Behind me, my assistant looked ready to say something, but I gave her a little signal to stay quiet. Stephen walked over, looking all conflicted. "Cherry, why'd you just disappear like that?" I gave him a faint smile. "Just making room for you and Giselle." That made his face go even darker. "Cherry, you know I came from nothing," he said after a pause. "If I want any shot at a decent life, I gotta hold on to someone like Giselle." I nodded. "You're right. Makes total sense." My chill response seemed to mess with his head even more. "Cherry, after you left, I looked everywhere for you," he said bitterly. "I know you went to the hospital." "Stephen, I'm actually grateful." I cut him off coldly. "I realized then that you weren't right for me. Walking away was the best move I could have made. Otherwise, you probably would have used me until there was nothing left." That hit a nerve, and his face got even uglier. I handed the rest of the night stuff to my secretary and bounced without another word. Just being around those two was killing my vibe. Better to avoid all that drama. Later, my secretary told me Giselle kept acting all high and mighty, even going around telling people she was my bestie. I laughed at how ridiculous that was and told my secretary to just let her be for now. As for the partnership, as long as I'm here, it's not happening, I said, period. That night, Stephen called me. "Cherry, we need to talk," he said. I shut him down right away. "Stephen, we have literally nothing to talk about." Chapter 3. "Stephen, we have literally nothing to talk about," I said ice cold. But Stephen fired back quickly. "Cherry, you don't want the deal between our families to fall through, do you?" I laughed out loud. Did this guy seriously not get that whether our companies worked together was totally up to me? Stephen had zero leverage here. What I didn't see coming was that after I blew him off, he just showed up at my office the very next day. "Mr. Jones," I said, super casual, "isn't it kinda rude to barge into someone's office uninvited?" I nodded for my secretary to leave, so it was just the two of us. Stephen's eyes got a little red as he stared at me. "Cherry, when you disappeared, I went looking for you. Did you get rid of our baby?" His voice was shaking with anger. I looked at how pissed he was and just laughed in disbelief. "So that's why you're here?" I said, cold as ice. "You want an answer? Fine. I didn't want my kid growing up without a dad. Happy now?" The color drained from his face. "Cherry, we both came from nothing. You know how hard it is for people like us to climb the ladder," he said. "Yeah, I'm marrying Giselle, but I never planned to ditch you." His little speech was straight up laughable. "And your point is?" I asked, not giving an inch. "Cherry, I still love you." "I don't love Giselle," he said. "If you come back, we can still have a future. Even have our baby. My marriage to Giselle is just a stepping stone for us." Hearing him try to justify his BS, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Get out, Stephen," I said, pointing to the door. Right then, whatever tiny bit of feelings I had left for him completely shattered. I'd been so blind to who he really was. He looked at me, desperate. "Cherry, do you even know how tight Giselle is with your company's boss? One word from her, and you're fired. Cherry, you better listen to me. If she ruins your career, you'll still have me to fall back on." His words were so ridiculous, they were almost funny. "No thanks, Stephen," I said firmly. "Trust me, no matter what happens, I'd never come crawling to you for help." Before I could kick him out, my office door slammed open again. This time it was Giselle. She stormed in, eyes blazing. "I knew it. You're the little homewrecker trying to steal my husband." I gave her an icy look and said, "I have zero interest in your husband. Both of you, get out." "Get out?" she screeched. "We came here for business, not so you could make moves on my man." She kept yelling, "Where's your boss? I want to see him right now. I'll make sure you're fired." Her little tantrum was pathetic, and I just watched her with cold disgust. Stephen rushed over to her, trying to calm her down. Giselle, let's go. There's nothing between me and Cherry. Chapter 4. Stephen reached out to pull Giselle away, but before he could, she slapped him hard across the face. Stephen, I only married you because I felt sorry for you. And now you dare cheat on me? She screamed, hitting him over and over while cussing him out. Stephen just hung his head, backing up step by step as she kept coming at him. Watching this whole thing, I just shook my head. The Stephen I used to know was confident and ambitious. Now he was just this sad, pathetic guy. I watched their little drama coldly and gave my secretary a subtle nod to call security. She quietly stepped aside with her phone. As Giselle kept slapping him, Stephen just stood there, totally humiliated. I felt this weird satisfaction. Thank God I didn't end up marrying him. Right then, I felt nothing but relief that I'd seen his true colors before it was too late. Suddenly, Giselle turned her rage on me, glaring as she screamed, "This is all your fault, you homewrecker. You seduced my husband." She lunged at me, ready to attack. I wasn't Stephen. The second she came at me, I slapped her hard across the face. The slap echoed through the room. Both Giselle and Stephen froze in shock. Stephen recovered first, grabbing my arm, his voice rising in anger. "Cherry, what the hell? Do you realize you just hit Giselle? You could lose your job for this." He glared at me, demanding, "Apologize to her right now." I smiled faintly, pulling my arm free. "She came at me first," I said calmly. Giselle, beyond pissed, screamed, "I want to see your CEO. I'll make sure you're fired." She stared me down and shouted, "You're dead, bitch." Her rage was kind of funny, but I shook my head. I was so done with these two. "Cherry, stop this nonsense," Stephen scolded. "You don't know, do you? Giselle's best friend is the daughter of your company's boss. One word from her, and you're done." I narrowed my eyes at him. "You sure about that? Last I checked, I was my dad's only kid. When did I get a best friend? Plus, if I were really BFFs with Giselle, wouldn't she already know who I am?" Just then, Giselle turned to my secretary, barking orders. "Our family came here to do business. If you don't fire this woman today, we're pulling the deal." "Got it," I said abruptly. She paused, looking smug, but I continued. "From now on, the Addams family will never do business with the Cooper family again." Turning to my secretary, I added, "Spread the word. All deals with the Cooper family are done, effective immediately." "Yes, President Addams," my secretary replied crisply. Chapter 5. My words hit Stephen and Giselle like a truck. Giselle sneered. "Who do you think you are? You really think you can call the shots on a deal between our families?" "Cherry, stop being ridiculous," Stephen jumped in, trying to fix the situation. I glanced at them, bored of their drama. "Ms. Cooper, please leave. It's done. Our company isn't working with yours anymore." The room went quiet, except for Giselle's sputtering in outrage. But I was already done with them. Just as I finished speaking, Giselle suddenly charged at me and slapped me hard across the face. "Who the hell do you think you are? Cancel the deal just because you said so," she shouted, totally losing it. "Do you even know I'm besties with your company's heiress?" Her words were full of attitude and rage, but I stayed chill. Turning to my secretary, I said, "Call security and report this to the cops for assault." The secretary quickly dialed security, quick and efficient. Meanwhile, Giselle, feeling bold, glared at me smugly. "I'm calling my dad right now. He'll talk to your CEO, and you'll be out of a job before you know it." "Cherry, begging now won't help you. You're about to lose everything," she added, dripping with venom. I shook my head at how clueless she was. She and Stephen had no idea who they were messing with, and I didn't feel like explaining it to them. Without wasting time, I told my secretary to go ahead with the police report. Unfazed, Giselle whipped out her phone and started calling her dad, confidence written all over her face. At the same time, Stephen came up to me, his tone cold and bossy. "Cherry, stop this nonsense and apologize to Giselle right now." I glanced at him, unimpressed. This guy wasn't even worth acknowledging anymore. But Stephen, seeing I didn't care, grabbed my arm and snarled, I'm warning you, Cherry. Apologize to my wife now. I met his gaze coldly. Why should I apologize, Stephen? It's for your own good, he shot back, lowering his voice. It's also for our future. His words were a joke. I just smiled faintly, not bothering to say anything else. To me, Stephen was nothing now, just some nobody from my past. A few moments later, Giselle strutted over to me, looking all triumphant. I just spoke to my dad. He's calling your CEO right now. You're as good as fired. Beg all you want, it won't make any difference, she sneered. You poor losers will never get how just one word from me can ruin everything for you. I watched her with amusement, but kept quiet. Her words meant nothing. Soon, security showed up. Without hesitating, they grabbed both Giselle and Stephen. What do you think you're doing? Giselle screeched in outrage. I'm a VIP guest of your CEO. Do you even know who you're messing with? The security team didn't say a word. Everyone at the company knew I was next in line to run things, so they were 100% on my side. As Giselle struggled, my dad called. Cherry, did that Cooper girl cause trouble at our company? He asked, sounding annoyed. I filled him in on what went down with Giselle. My dad's response was quick and firm. In that case, cut off all business with the Cooper family. They've been riding our coattails for too long anyway. The Cooper family had been struggling for years, barely staying afloat with my dad's help. Yet here was Giselle, waltzing into our company and acting like she owned the place, even demanding I get fired. That kind of nerve wasn't going to fly. Cherry, do you even know what you're doing? Giselle screamed at me, her face twisted with rage. I'll call your CEO myself. I'll get you fired. I'll call my bestie right now. Her empty threats hung in the air, but I wasn't bothered, watching her melt down with mild amusement. She still didn't get that she had zero power here. Chapter 6. Giselle's voice echoed through the room, her emotions totally out of control. I looked at her coldly and said, Go ahead, make the call. I'd love to know who this bestie of yours is. My words left her stunned. Deep down, she knew she had no connection to the Addams family heiress. She didn't even know my name. Giselle had just assumed that coming to this company meant she'd automatically be tight with the Addams family heiress. That blind confidence had made her so cocky. Giselle, I said, my voice chilling. I wasn't aware we were such good friends. Her face froze in shock as she turned to look at me. Cherry, what are you talking about? Stephen, standing nearby, was just as confused. You're from some backwater mountain village, aren't you? I couldn't help but laugh at how clueless he was. I'm actually glad I let you believe that back then. If you'd known the truth, I bet you would have tried to scam me even harder. With that, I turned to the security guards and ordered, throw them out. And make it crystal clear that our company will never do business with the Cooper family again. Giselle started fighting back, but it was pointless. Security quickly dragged her and Stephen out of the building. Later that day, my family publicly announced we were cutting all ties with the Cooper family. The Cooper family had been on the brink of collapse, but now, their downfall was a sure thing. They'd borrowed tons of money, and their creditors thought that their deal with our family would ensure they'd eventually pay it back. But now, that dream was shattered. Everyone could see the Cooper family had no way to pay their debts. So the creditors immediately started demanding their money back. Just like that, the Cooper family was in a full-blown financial crisis, with zero chance of recovery. What surprised me was getting a call from Stephen that evening. Cherry, I know I messed up, he begged. I know you still love me. Can we start over? I shot back coldly, Stephen, we've been done for a long time. Don't call me again. Without waiting for him to respond, I hung up and immediately blocked his number. I was completely over him. Not just over him. I was disgusted. He wasn't even worth my contempt. A few days later, surprise, surprise, the Cooper family showed up at the company again. This time, Giselle brought her dad, with Stephen trailing behind them. Stephen's eyes were all conflicted when he saw me, while Giselle's were full of pure hate. Giselle's dad came up to me with this forced smile. You must be Miss Addams, he said. I'm an old friend of your father's. I just smiled politely, saying nothing. The Cooper family had this habit of making stuff up, just like how Giselle claimed to be my bestie. Noticing I wasn't saying anything, Mr. Cooper's smile got more awkward. "Miss Adams," he started, "I just found out about what happened between you and Stephen. Our Giselle loves him deeply and didn't mean to take him from you. If that's why our deal got cancelled, we're willing to have Giselle and Stephen divorce." Chapter 7. Mr. Cooper stared at me, his face practically screaming desperation. When I heard what he said, I froze for a sec. Taking Stephen back? That thought had never even crossed my mind. Honestly, that piece of trash was perfect for the Cooper family. The desperation in his voice was obvious, but it was way too late for the Cooper family to try and fix things. I shook my head quickly. No need. Stephen and I are done. Completely done. Right now, all I wanted was for him to stay as far away from me as humanly possible. When he heard that, Mr. Cooper looked totally shocked. He hesitated before asking, "Then, Miss Adams, about the business deal between our families?" "Sorry." I cut him off firmly, "but working with your family is off the table. Period." I looked Mr. Cooper straight in the eye and added calmly, "Let's be real, we can easily find way better partners to work with." As my words sank in, Mr. Cooper went pale. Anger flashed in his eyes as he grabbed his cane and swung it hard at Stephen. Stephen let out this painful cry as he dropped to the floor. Without missing a beat, Mr. Cooper kept whacking him with the cane. "You useless idiot. How dare you piss off Miss Adams?" He yelled with every hit, occasionally glancing my way, like he was checking if I felt bad for Stephen. I totally got what he was doing. He probably thought beating Stephen in front of me would make me feel sorry for him. But seriously, how could I possibly care about a guy like that? Meanwhile, Giselle's face twisted in pain as she watched her precious hubby getting his ass kicked. "Mr. Cooper," I said with a slight smile, "if you need to discipline your son-in-law, maybe do it at home. This is a business, not Jerry Springer." My comment just made Mr. Cooper even more embarrassed. Left with no choice, he helped Stephen up and dragged him away. As they left, Stephen turned to look at me, his eyes begging for help. I completely ignored him. Couldn't care less about his problems. Later that night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was one of Stephen's buddies. "Cherry, you need to come see Stephen. The Cooper family beat him so bad, he's in the hospital. Please, I know you still care about him. He needs you right now." Hearing this, I let out a little laugh and said, "In that case, hope he gets better soon." I was about to hang up when the guy on the other end got all worked up. "Cherry, what the hell? What's that supposed to mean? Stephen got beaten up because of you, and you're just gonna do nothing?" I replied coldly, "What's he got to do with me? Isn't Giselle his wife, not me? But you can't just bail on him. Stephen loved you for years. Don't tell me those years meant nothing to you." I laughed softly. "If you really cared about the years I spent with him, you wouldn't have been the one telling him to dummy back then." The other end went totally silent. My words had hit home. With that, I ended the call and blocked the number. Stephen regretted everything. That much was obvious. He'd been calling me every day, trying to apologize. Every time I saw his number, I blocked it without thinking twice. I had no clue how many new numbers he used to try to reach me, but eventually, I managed to shut him up for good. For me, Stephen was just a closed chapter in my life. As for the Cooper family, without my family's company backing them, their debt crisis completely blew up. Mr. Cooper desperately tried to find new investors, but nobody wanted anything to do with them anymore. Their family fortune crumbled, leaving them basically bankrupt. Chapter 8. Not long after Stephen got out of the hospital, Giselle brought him back to the Cooper family. When Mr. Cooper saw him, he lost it again and beat Stephen with his cane so badly that he ended up back in the hospital with even worse injuries. Giselle, feeling sorry for him, tried like crazy to stop her dad. But in all the chaos, Mr. Cooper pushed her to the ground. Her stomach hit the edge of a table, and she started bleeding like crazy. Tragically, she lost the baby. Stephen's friend called me again, begging me to help. "Cherry, if you don't step in, the Cooper family might literally beat Stephen to death." When I heard that, I couldn't help but laugh. That would be perfect. At least then, he'd stop bothering me. And I hung up. After Giselle lost the baby, the Cooper family directed all their rage at Stephen. While he was still in the hospital recovering, they dragged him back to their house in the middle of the night and beat him again brutally. This time, the injuries killed him. Stephen was beaten to death. When Mr. Cooper realized he'd killed someone, he freaked out and fled overseas. As for Giselle, when she found out her husband was dead and her baby was gone, she completely lost it. She was put in a psych ward that same day. The last call I got was from Stephen's parents. Years ago, I met them when Stephen brought me home. Back then, he promised to love me forever. He even joked that if he ever stopped loving me, he'd meet a horrible end. Now, it looked like his words had come true. On the phone, Stephen's mom was sobbing her heart out. She apologized over and over, saying she never thought things would end up like this. She told me that when Stephen decided to leave me for Giselle, they were totally against it, but he insisted on going through with it. I didn't try to comfort her. Instead, I just said, whatever was between Stephen and me ended a long time ago. And honestly, I'm super grateful I never married him. They eventually took Stephen's body away. As for Giselle, they didn't even bother with her. The Cooper family was completely ruined overnight. Their company was sold off to pay debts, but even that wasn't enough to cover what they owed. Mr. Cooper had borrowed tons of money, and after they liquidated the company, there was still a huge amount of debt left. A few months later, I got more familiar with our company's operations and started taking over most of my dad's responsibilities. One day, my dad told me that Mr. Cooper had been killed overseas. He explained that the Cooper family's creditors had tracked Mr. Cooper down abroad. When he couldn't pay back the money he owed, they snapped and beat him to death. When I heard this, I was surprised for a moment, but quickly realized it wasn't really that shocking. After all, he'd beaten Stephen to death, only to end up dying the exact same way himself. I guess what goes around really does come around.